welcome to the Emeritus Center's second presentation for the spring semester and the first immediate post-Super Bowl get-together as well. Our guest speaker today is Marchand. Mark is a writer and former adjunct professor in the journalism program at UAlbany, who taught courses in news and reporting, crisis communication, and public relations writing since 2008. He served as a senior manager in corporate communications and media relations at Verizon for almost 25 years. And before that, he was a daily newspaper reporter in Springfield, Massachusetts. Mark's two books include an engaging travel log, U.S. Route 1, Rediscovering the New World, and a historical fiction novel, The Answer from Surveyor 3, which combines the real story of two of the 20th century's most important events, the assassination of JFK and the Apollo moon landing program, which has gotten some very good reaction on Amazon. Today, Mark will take us along his trek from last year, a U.S. Route 20, America's longest road, stretching from Oregon to Boston and running right out there for a little bit. Along the way, he stopped and interviewed people ranging from work campers, think the movie Nomadland, in Cody, Wyoming, to the man who runs the Field of Dreams movie site in a cornfield in Iowa. He'll share his encounters with bison in Yellowstone and his wandering in the halls of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, all sites found on Route 20, while also sharing some of the natural history of the land and cities along Route 20. Please welcome the Capital District's geographical and cultural raconteur, Mark Marchand.
Thanks, man. So thank you, Scott. Thanks, Jim. And hello to Nancy, who I got to know. Nancy is the department chair and distinguished mentor and professor of the journalism program, and taught there for 10 years and enjoyed it. So thank you for saying that. I'm still in touch with many of my students. It always amazes me, but I finally decided to stop last year. It was one of the most enjoyable things I ever did in my life. I love UAlbany. I'm a product of a great state university system myself, the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and have been involved within the last 10 years on the board of their alumni association. And I really think we would be at such a loss were it not for these great institutions of learning. So yes, as Scott mentioned, Route 20 is right out there, and for many years I only knew it as the road behind Crossgates and UAlbany. But it was while I was giving a presentation at the Clifton Park Half Moon Library some years ago, and on my first book, which was about driving US Route 1, that somebody at the very end of my discussion, and I don't know why I wasn't prepared for this, said, "You drove Route 1 from Maine to Key West, and you wrote a book about it. What's next?" And I kind of mumbled something about east-west. And so I started investigating after that, but COVID got in the way. But this is the book I wrote. Surprisingly, it still sells on Amazon, and it's not a runaway bestseller. But last week I noticed that in the first couple of weeks of February, somebody bought 3 copies, and I was excited. But I published it in 2018, drove Route 1 all the way from northern Maine to Key West. It was just something I always wanted to do. I'm fascinated with natural history. I'm fascinated with geography, and I'm fascinated with writing. And I've been to Italy, I've been to Paris, to London, but I still think there's so much to be revealed about what we have here in the 50 states. Excuse me, watch your step with the cables. So I wrote that book, and then sparked by the question I got at the library presentation in 2019, I began searching where could I go next? COVID, of course. But my likely target was found here. This is Route 20. The red stretches all the way from 3,365 miles. That's us there, that red arrow, from Newport, Oregon, right on the Pacific Ocean. Beautiful, beautiful little city. And it goes all the way through Yellowstone, through the city of Chicago, and ends at Kenmore Square in Boston. And it has the distinction of being the longest road in the United States. So at the very least, when you leave here today, you have an answer to a great trivia question. And if you're a Jeopardy watcher like me, maybe it'll come up sometime. But it's the longest road in the United States. And by the way, full disclosure, I hate the interstates. I think it's this mind-numbing antiseptic environment. And when I take these drives, and I take a lot of local drives throughout the Northeast, up to Watertown, out past Cleveland, I always take local roads because they reveal so much to us. And I've become adept at passing something interesting, slamming on the brakes, creating a traffic mess, turning around and going to talk to people. So that's the road I drove.
I've heard of Route 66. That's
Yep.
more popular. How long is that?
Route 66, first of all, great question, is decommissioned. It is no longer a US highway. But it's so famous,
Yeah.
from songs, movies, TV series,
How long was it?
that it's about 1,900, 2,000 miles. It was meant as a westward hoe route from, I'm trying to remember exactly where it started.
It didn't go all the way to the Atlantic.
Where's that?
It didn't go all the way to the.
It didn't go all the way to the Atlantic. I think it started somewhere in the middle states and went to California. But what's happened is people in these individual states know the reputation of Route 66. So they've resurrected portions of Route 66 in the states as a tourist attraction, which I thought was very smart. But yeah, it didn't go as long as this. And by the way, a bit of history too. Route 20 did not start life as the longest road in the country because it stopped at Yellowstone. So it started in Boston, went to Yellowstone in 1926. Some of the routes, the roadways were gravel at that point. And it was only in 1940 that politicians in Newport, Oregon, and the rest of Oregon said, hey, can you extend it to the coast? So it had two starting dates, 1926 and 1940.
Where is it in relation to the Lincoln? It's not the Lincoln Highway.
No.
So is that just?
Lincoln Highway, I think, is Route 30. And the way the national road systems are set up back in 26 is that the lower numbers were up here, the east-west roads, and then the higher numbers were down here. But actually up here by Oregon, Route 30 is above Route 20. It's kind of an oddity. And then the north-south routes in 1926, when they first set up this network, like the Route 1 I just showed you, there were odd numbers. Even numbers, usually 0 for the east-west roads. Kind of the same with the interstates today, right? You start in Boston and Route I-90, you go west pretty much all the way. And you got Route 1 and you got 95 going north-south. So I did that, and I had I love telling people I have no itinerary when I do these trips. I do very little advanced planning purposely, even though we have the internet and I can Google Maps, I can look at every single inch of the trip. And I'll talk more about that, but my goal is I don't really do much planning, and it's very helpful to me. Route 20 was a lot longer than the 2,400 miles of Route 1. which I drove in 2014. A lot longer by more than 1,000 miles. I took my own car on Route 1. I drove from here, went through Canada, and went to where Route 1 starts up in Fort Kent. And then drove all the way to Key West over the course of 2 weeks. And my wife flew down and met me. And we drove back up back here to Clifton Park, where we live. It really was tough to do that because Route 20 is so long and way out there on the West Coast. So during the dark, despairing depths of COVID, I tried to hatch a plan, and one sort of presented itself in June of 2023. I had to be on the West Coast for a conference. I mentioned to some of you, I'm on the board of directors of Broadview, which just redid the arena here where they have the two basketball teams played. And there was a credit union training conference, financial training conference out there. So my wife and I were going out there, and I figured I would rent a car and drive Route 20 back home, and my wife would fly home. I rented a car in Seattle, drove it to Newport, Oregon, and which is about 250 miles, and then I started my trip. So some similarities, some quick differences. By the way, I took 600, 700 photos. Thankfully, I'm not going to show you all of them today. So I expect your deep appreciation for that. I had no itinerary. I have this theme. I've been reading travel writing since I was in college. And I love great writing, Paul Thoreau, John McPhee, great travel writing. And a lot of them do the same thing, and I learn from them. So it was not an original idea, was to embark on a trip and just absorb the world as it's presented to you. I consumed way too much junk food, crap food on the way. I did not report 90% of that to my wife. And as a writer and somebody who likes to sit back and think about life, just being alone. I did this trip myself, like Route 1. And this is just this past summer. I started on the 4th of July. Just gave me a lot of time to think and get away from this. I carried this with me, but to get away from the computer, to get away from the TV screen. And it just was so helpful to me, particularly after COVID. I think we live in a great country. I'm not a overtly, the son of an Air Force sergeant, and I love my country, and I love the geography, the cities, the people. And one of the ways you can see them and interact with them is not here, but it's just driving and talking to them. I am shocked at how many people, as I walk in the door, as I meet them, talk to me about their lives on this trip and allow me to put the phone in front of them and record an interview. I'm absolutely shocked. I think it's important to record them. I got to write about them in the book, and I asked them their permission, and I'm going to show you some of them. And Scott is kind of giving away some of my secrets in that bio, but driving Route 1, the last sort of set of logistics, I was never far from population centers. I never worried about, could I find a hotel to stay from Maine down to Key West? Not the same out west. Very difficult, very different. I drove hundreds and hundreds of miles without seeing people, without passing through cities or towns. And some of them I passed through in Nebraska and Wyoming. They literally had a sign that said population 9 people. I mean, there just wasn't a lot there. So I really had to worry about, how far I would drive and where I might be able to stay. And I only came close to sleeping in my car once in Nebraska. It was close. It was discomforting for me as a person here in the Northeast to be sort of out of touch with humanity on many of the stretches on Route 20 out west. There was treacherous, curvy roads, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And I would lose cell phone service for hours at a time. I was describing to Jim, because I am older, I am a Medicare patient. And I do these things by myself. There's a function in Google Maps that I allow my wife to track me where I go, just for safety, that if she doesn't hear from me for a day or two, can see the last place I was, and she can call some police department in Nebraska and say, could you help me find my husband? I think it made both of us feel better. So this is day one. I had to take the requisite selfie. This is the actual sign. This is I think it's a Rite Aid right here. I was just getting ready to leave, and that's the actual sign. It sits there in Newport, Oregon. It says, if you follow this road, you'll end up in Boston. And I never knew that, and I just thought that was so cool. I grew up in Massachusetts, and I'm a Boston person, and I never knew that Route 20 went all the way to the West Coast. It started on July 4th, 2023, pure accident. Just between the business conference in California and visiting my wife's brother up in Seattle. I just started on the 4th of July, which as it turned out was kind of cool. And one of our friends suggested this, since I had never, I've been all over the world, but I had never touched the Pacific. So she said, for good luck, you got to touch the waters of the Pacific. So I did. And of course, I documented it with a photo. This was just, the elusive sunset into the ocean picture you can't really get here. This is in Newport, Oregon. Newport, by the way, has the best beaches in the state of Oregon. It's just kind of a little bit down on its luck. A lot of closed businesses, but it's in the summer it really thrives. I love to interview people. I don't know if I have the skills of somebody like Nancy, but I love to talk to people and record them. This is the mayor of Newport, Oregon. His name is Dean Sawyer. Interesting guy, long serving public servant, former chief of police. In his retirement, ran for mayor. But the whole thing is shrouded in controversy. I was also telling Jim, and I think Scott, that I love on these trips, driving through the country, to post on Facebook and other things on social media. This is where I am, this is what I'm doing. And so I interviewed Dean in a Dunkin' Donuts I think it was a Dunkin' Donuts, right in Newport, right across from the water. Great guy. Except when I posted his picture on Facebook, a couple of days later, I began to get these angry messages on my Facebook page. It said, did you know this guy is under investigation for posting anti-homophobic, anti-trans comments in the statewide PBS network in Oregon had published a big story about it. And the controversy kind of grew over a couple of days, and people asked why I was sort of glorifying him and giving him publicity. And I said, I didn't know. He didn't tell me. The upshot of that is I sort of took that part of my Facebook post down because I didn't want my Facebook page to be a venue for people to attack him. But he resigned a week later. If you Google him, Dean Sawyer, mayor of Newport, you'll see he resigned about a week after the 4th of July. So, and I'm faced with this conundrum when I'm writing my book right now. How much of that interview, if any, do I include? I'm not sure. But as a nonfiction writer, a former journalist, I'm torn. So, but that's the very affable guy. I absolutely loved talking to him. So I headed east from Newport. I stopped for just a few minutes in Corvallis, which is a famous old university town. I love college campuses. I've stopped at Notre Dame. I've stopped at college campuses across the country. I just love these oases of thinking and research and students and professors. This is the football stadium at Oregon State where the Badgers play. I love sports, but I thought it was interesting, and it was all closed down because it was the summer, and this was the only place that could sort of get a peek inside the stadium. But it just all right. I included it as a sort of a reminder that I love college campuses. So Central Western Oregon was a shock to me because of my decision to not do any planning. There's this little thing called the Cascades. That the Cascade Mountain Range is just unbelievable. They stretch from Canada down, north, south, all the way down towards California. Severe elevation, curvy roads. I gripped the wheel so tight that my hands were cramped later that day. A lot of the curvy roads had no guardrails. And it just was a little terrifying. Elevation as much as 5,000 feet. Amazing, some of the deepest forest I've ever seen. Some of the most beautiful forest I've ever seen. As I descended, Route 20, finally got out of the Cascades and started to get some cell service back. Route 20 just like ejected me into this arid desert-like region and had one of the greatest names that I experienced along the way, the Oregon Badlands Wilderness. Again, total lack of planning, not prepared, but it was an amazing, and that's where I took more photographs. Wilderness is an apt description. I would drive mile after mile with no sign at all of human beings once I left this little town called Sisters. So if you have a really sharp eye, you could see, this was in my rental car. I was driving 70 miles an hour. This is Route 20 in the Oregon Badlands Wilderness. And I tried a couple of times to take a photo straight out looking east as I was driving along. I took a couple of these and I never captured a car coming the other way. But a couple of times I was veered off the road as I was trying to frame the photo, so I gave that up. That wasn't the smartest thing to do. But what I was trying to give people who followed me on Facebook the impression is that you see those hills in the distance. I would literally drive for another half hour and I would be no closer. Still be sitting there. And you just don't see that in the Northeast. I mean, you leave here and you go towards Glens Falls and you're in the Adirondacks. And this was an example of in this desert-like region, the type of vegetation was these small sagebrush, close to the ground plants. And it was very jarring because I had just gone from this massive forest into what was literally a desert. I stopped, take pictures to try to give an impression. As you go further east in Oregon, going towards the Idaho border, there are these hills that come in that form a canyon, and it follows, I think it's called the Great Swamp Creek, that the road follows for a while. And and the sun it was starting to get late in the day. The sun was giving me some amazing late day color. This is that creek I talked about. It's just was so captivating. And I thought to myself how lucky I was that never in my lifetime would I purposely have seen that. And I just absolutely was in love with the topography, the geology. And each step of the way, and I think because I did no planning, I didn't know what to expect, there were always these surprises. This is another view. There's a site that's in Idaho somewhere where there's a lot of volcanic remnants of lava flow. This isn't one of them. I wasn't quite sure what that was, but again, this is very typical of Eastern Oregon in that desert-like region. So from the Badlands to Idaho, I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who said Idaho doesn't border Oregon. I'm here to tell you it does. Honest to God, Route 20 takes you right across the river into Idaho. I spent a night in Ontario, Oregon. I drove way too long the first day. My wife was very worried about me, and I didn't get to a hotel till 10 o'clock. Anybody ever remember the Snake River, what it's famous for? Evil, Knievel. Well, you guys are better than the library group, because it would seem familiar to those of us who are a little bit older that it was motorcycle daredevil Evel Knievel who tried to jump there in 1974. And it didn't go well. And I did a little bit of research online. This is where Evel ended up. And tried to drive a little south to see if I could find this exact spot, but I couldn't. So that's the Snake River. That's what it's famous for. So I crossed the Snake River into Idaho the next morning. In Boise, Idaho is one of the most beautiful, clean cities I've ever been in. And I don't know whether it was the holiday, because it was 5th of July, whether it was quiet, everybody was on vacation, but I parked downtown, I walked all over the place, found the Capitol, and there weren't a lot of people around. I had some security people who were eyeing me as I got closer. There's a replica of the Liberty Bell that's in front of the state capitol that there's some signs that say, don't touch this, it's a precious artifact. But some young man while I was there and his mother came up to it and went underneath and rang it and almost became deaf in the process. And because it made a very loud noise, it's a working bell, and all the security people came running to see what was going on. So that's the state capitol. It was just stunning. East of Boise, nothing. Just a lot of great, beautiful land going towards Wyoming. But here's where I saw one of the first really unexpected geographical oddities. It's called Craters of the Moon. Anybody ever hear of that?
Yes.
Oh, you have?
I was there during the eclipse.
What's that?
I was there during the.
During the eclipse? What year, 2017? Yeah, okay, all right. I've been doing some writing for the Adirondack Explorer. They're all getting excited for April 8th. The totality, you're going to be able to view it up there. Great, well, I didn't think I'd ever meet anybody who'd been to Craters of the Moon. It was.
We also saw the Eagle jump.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, we found.
Okay.
It's a marker.
It was named because the guy who discovered it thought it looked like looking at the moon through a telescope. And I just sat there in awe looking at this. It's this dark volcanic rock and craters deposited over thousands of years of, I think there's 25 separate volcanoes, which is very rare. 25 separate volcanoes over the millennia were spewing lava, creating this amazing, this is a sort of an overview and one of the, as you enter the craters of what it looks like. But this is what it looks like from the road. There's several
Yeah.
places to pull off to the side. I don't know if you remember these. And it's just acre after acre, mile after mile. This was volcanic ash, volcanic rock, lava that spewed over time and just spread out over this area in eastern Idaho. Really stunning to look at. This was another view. And then finally, this was another one. That's why it looked similar to the one I thought looked very similar in eastern Oregon. But it was just this really cool geographic oddity. So I always, Jim probably knows this, I always throw in a little geographic quiz, something that I uncover in my research as I write these books. You know, I've got the Word document going here, and like it seems like every 12 minutes I'm checking like what's the population of Bridgeport, Connecticut, or Newport, Oregon on the other screen. So I discovered that one geographic question that I always ask the audience, does anybody know what's the westernmost community in the United States? It's not Newport. Any guesses?
You're talking.
You mean
Continental, yes, continental, not Alaska. I'm throwing out Alaska.
Hawaii.
What's that? I should say continental, by the way. Yeah.
Conus.
What's that?
In meteorology, we call it the
Okay.
contiguous US, CONUS, conus.
Okay.
That's the
Good.
meteorological word.
Well, I was shocked to find the answer. Everybody always says Seattle or San Francisco, but it's Portland. You look at the lat long, Portland by beats out Seattle by just a little bit. So another trivia question that you can answer. In the continental of the 48 states, Portland is the westernmost. And it's pretty close if you look at San Francisco or Seattle. So it's enough of the quizzes for today. So Yellowstone. I've never been to Yellowstone. I love national parks. I think they're a national treasure. I'm thrilled that my tax dollars do help support the maintenance of these parks. The one thing that just, left an impression on me was the traffic. On my third day on the road. And I went through this little town in Idaho called West Yellowstone to get into the park in the western entrance. It took me 2 to 3 hours. The traffic was coming on 3 roads in this little town, which is really typical western town with saloons and things that make it look like something out of the old Gunsmoke series. And people were cutting each other off and people were surly. And I finally made the gates by about 10 o'clock in the morning and got in. And I love the experience. And I probably would have never seen it. But Route 20 goes right through the park. Except national parks don't allow designation of a road through the park as part of the numerical road or highway system. So they tell you that to roughly follow Route 20, you take, I think it's called the Southern Route through Yellowstone, but they don't allow it to be technically called Route 20, which kind of surprised me. Staggering amount of traffic. If you ever want to see RVs, Winnebagos, go to Yellowstone this summer. I was in a little Toyota Camry, which I rented up in Seattle, and I felt dwarfed by these things. And everybody had them, and everybody was bringing their bathrooms, their bedrooms with them. I mean, it was just and they block the roads, or they go very slow. At one point in Yellowstone, traffic was so bad, because they're still working on some roads, the traffic came to a full stop for an hour. And everybody shut off their cars on the road I was wandering through. I put it in park, put the handbrake on, and I fell asleep. I hadn't been sleeping that well, in a strange hotel rooms. And didn't wake up until the RV behind me blasted on his horn. The traffic had started to move. But I loved it. I, again, considered myself very fortunate. I don't think I would have ever seen Yellowstone were it not for the trip. Here's another thing I didn't know. Nobody told me. There's this little thing called the Rocky Mountains. Yellowstone sits on the Rockies, and the elevation is 8,000 to 10,000 feet. Now, I'm a licensed private pilot. I know that when I get to 8, 9, 10,000 feet, I'm required to be on supplemental oxygen. And you spend a good day, like I did at Yellowstone, wandering through Yellowstone, you get an altitude headache. The next day in Cody, Wyoming, I had quite a headache. And so I was talking to people, and they said, well, where were you? And they said, I was in Yellowstone. I said, well, hypoxia, you didn't have as much oxygen as you're normally used to. So if you ever go to Yellowstone, take it easy. So this is what Yellowstone looked like. I think I took 100 photos. I'll give you just a very brief sampling, but each step of the way were panoramas, vistas like this, all preserved. No one can touch them. But the roads going through were just clogged with so much traffic. So hopefully I can get this to work. Yeah, hopefully. This was not even Old Faithful. This was a smaller geyser. And I stood there for 20 minutes watching this thing go up and down. And I have a friend in Clifton Park, Joanne Coons. She's a noted science teacher, and she powers the whole house with geothermal energy. And I was always sort of a doubting person about that. But if you look at what's underneath Yellowstone, just an amazing, amazing amount of this energy. There's a couple of other examples of this in the same area. This is this constant seepage in this pool of water coming up and combining with some chemical elements that happen to be in that area that turns it this aquamarine blue. Even better, and a little bit more frightening, this is all in the same area, and they have these really cool boardwalks that take you through. This is another bubbling place of escape for underground energy, and the water that bubbles up, which they tell you right up front, don't even touch this stuff because you'll burn, you'll scald your hand. But I don't know if there's anybody in here who studied chemistry, physics, but this hot water that was coming up was combining with sulfur in this particular pool to form a chemical known as H2SO4, or sulfuric acid. So they were very, very careful, and there were little signs that if you take one step away from the boardwalk, we're not responsible for your safety. But just these sites, Yellowstone was just littered with them. I talked to one of the rangers while I was there, and they said, really, it takes a month to see Yellowstone. I was there for one day. And it's overwhelming. There's this massive northern part of Yellowstone that goes to much higher elevations. So as I was leaving, this is my friend Bill, the bison. One of the largest collections of the restored populations of bison are in Yellowstone. And as you pay your 25, 30 bucks to get in, they give you a sheet. It says, chill out. Don't go more than 25 feet close to these animals. Antelope, bison, these are big, big creatures. I came across this fellow as I was sort of wandering out of toward the eastern gate of Yellowstone. He was rolling around on his back in this dirt pile, and I suspect he was trying to shed some older skin, and obviously a male and big horns. So me and a couple of other motorists stopped our cars, got our phones out, took pictures, but we stayed the required distance. And this guy kind of stamped his feet a little bit, turned and looked at us. You know, I wasn't afraid at all. So later that night, I get to Cody, Wyoming. And as I often do, I curate a lot of the information I picked up during the day. And I looked at the handout that the Yellowstone Park Ranger had given me that said 25 feet. Except that it wasn't 25 feet, it was 25 yards. I had kind of this sense in the back of my head that I put myself in danger, and I was way too close. And I should not have stopped the car. I should not have been that close to take the picture. And this is not even using the zoom in function on the phone. He was right across the street from us. So if you ever go to Yellowstone, it's 75 yards. Stay away from the wildlife. Bill. The Cody, Wyoming. Scott has given away a little bit to say. Anybody ever see the movie Nomadland?
Yes.
Great movie. Didn't Frances McDormand win the Oscar for that? She was
Got Best Picture, I know, and
Yeah.
maybe.
great book too, by the way. There's this thing called work campers. These people who give up their lives, people like us who just decide I'm going to live on the road. In Nomadland was this reporter from Brooklyn, I forget her name. She followed around work campers for 2-3 years. And one of the people she followed was the main character in the movie Nomadland. And they go to places like Amazon. They seek work around the country. They park for 2 or 3 months. An example is an Amazon warehouse at Christmas. And they work there for 2 or 3 months. Amazon loves them. They give them parking. The hookups for sewer, electricity, water. I thought it was great. One of my favorite books I've read in the last couple of years. This author from Brooklyn, who's also a reporter before that, amazing writer. So I'm suffering the next morning from an altitude headache. I'm in the Holiday Inn Express in Cody, Wyoming, which is a really cool Western town. And the guy who serves me, my waiter, is a guy named JW. And I liked him because he looked like Santa Claus. And so I had my breakfast. He's very nice. And I'm checking out. And I have this feeling that he's one of the people I should interview. What's his life like? How did he end up here in Cody, Wyoming? So I go back and I talk to him. Put my suitcase in the car. I come back in the hotel and I say, is your shift over? Can I talk to you for a while? I'm a writer from New York State. I'm driving Route 20. He says, sure. But we have to include my wife. She's the hostess here. So I'm like, sure, I'll talk to the both of you. So we sit down, we talk, and this is JW and Corey. And the first thing they tell me, I said, well, where are you from? How did you end up here in Cody, Wyoming? He said, we're work campers. And they said to me, did you see the movie Nomadland? I said, yes, I read the book too. I said, well, we know a lot of those people who were depicted in Nomadland, who were quoted and interviewed in the book. She was a paralegal. He was a plumber in Southern California. 3 or 4 years ago, around the time of COVID, they gave up their jobs, their lives. They bought a big RV. They travel around the country and they go to places where they can park for 2 or 3 months and work. And the Holiday Inn Express in Cody, Wyoming was their current stop for the summer. And I talked to some of the managers of the hotel later, and they said, we just love these people. They're the best employees. They just are so dedicated to their jobs. We love them. And we recruit them. So I've continued after I interviewed them, and they will be appearing in my book. They have a Facebook page, and I've sort of followed them around the country. After they left Holiday Inn Express a few weeks later in Cody, Wyoming, they were going to help harvest beets in North Dakota. Just work. And I tracked them down. This week, there was a big golf tournament in Phoenix, Arizona, and they were working at the tournament. So they continue to just travel around the country. This is Corey. This is JW. He does look like Santa Claus. Come on.
Yeah.
So I continued to go east from there on Route 20. Another unplanned site was the Wind River Canyon in Wyoming. It's famous 16-mile drive along this river. It's like a sort of a micro Colorado River, formed this canyon over thousands of years. And it's an amazing whitewater rafting place. Not as dangerous as the Colorado River at points, but as I stood there, I saw boat after boat come down the river with guides yelling at people to not get too close to the edge of the boat. And then I always do this. I set up my Camry that I rented and drove across the country. I took a similar shot when I was in Washington, D.C., because Route 1 goes through Washington, D.C. in 2014. It was like a Seinfeld episode. I got such a great parking spot in Washington that I took a picture of it and I put it on Facebook. But yeah, I lived in that car for 2 weeks. Nebraska. Next state. Nebraska is long. There are not many people who live there. The North Platte River, Route 20 follows the river from west to east. I loved it. It was very quiet. I had my worst hotel stay there. But this is just typical. Nebraska really loves its Western heritage, its history. This is one of the original post offices in the town of, I forget what town that was in. Russville. Very nicely preserved and still a working post office. In Nebraska, I had my one and only run-in with a gentleman of the law. I was doing 74 miles an hour on Route 20 one morning and talking to my wife on the cell phone, and he pulled me over. There was nobody else on the road. The speed limit was 70. And I was doing 72. I think he was just bored. And I actually asked friends of mine after, should I have taken a selfie with him? And they said, no, he was a state trooper. His name was A.H. Nilsson. But, comes up, knocks on the window, and I'm in a panic because, it doesn't happen to me very often. I'm a pretty good driver. And he says, look, I got you going faster than the speed limit. License, registration, all this stuff. I said, well, it's a rental car. My hands are shaking. I can't find the paperwork in the glove compartment. And he said, look, would you just calm down? He said, I'm only going to give you a warning. Thank God. This was a warning. But he said, I got to run you through the system. So I finally find the registration paperwork for the car. He takes my license and goes back, runs me through the system, comes back. Says, what are you doing in Nebraska? I said, that's a great question. I said, I started out a couple of days ago in Newport, Oregon, and I'm driving to Boston. And he just looks at me and shakes his head and said, really? I said, yes. He said, but you have Arizona plates on your car. That the rental car I had was from Arizona because they shift them all over the country. And he said, look, he said, just, I got to give you a warning because I pulled you over. There's no fine. There's nothing. And he said, but again, describe to me what you're doing. And I said, well, I'm hoping to write a book. I said, this is a great country. I'm seeing 12 states on Route 20. So that's all I'm doing. And he looks at me and he says, but will I show up in your book? And I, at that point, I was feeling a lot better about the whole experience. And I said, do you want me to put you in the book? And he said, yeah. So I'll mention him in my book. But I had to save that. I love billboards.
Song from Alice's Restaurant in the background.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. I love billboards. This was in Nebraska, God's own cow country. 3,814,000 acres big, Cherry County. Okay, well, cow country. I guess they have a lot of cows. So this was Solvent Perrette, just another person I met randomly. It was the weekend at this point, but she was working at this great network of rivers called the Niobrara, I don't know how to pronounce it that well, that is a great destination for people to come to from hundreds of miles around to go boating, canoeing. And she was nice enough to sit down and talk with me. She's from Minnesota. She came there for a weekend, met her husband, moved to Nebraska permanently. When she's not park rangering, she's a teacher in the school system in the fall and in the spring. But just a wonderful person. And a recurring theme when I talk to people on the road is, how'd you do during COVID? Did that affect people who came to this place and whatnot, particularly one place I'm going to show you. And she said, not really. She said, Nebraska was not a masking state. That they kind of resisted that whole thing and, low vaccination rates, but they never had a high incidence of COVID because people don't live that close to each other in Nebraska. But she was lovely. And I ended up spending more time there, and she made me watch a movie they have in the Welcome Center. But very, very sweet. Iowa. What do you think of when you hear Iowa? Corn. Corn. I crossed the border from Nebraska into Iowa, and I saw lots of corn. Corn here, corn there. And at one point, when I snapped this picture, I like to get into the five senses. It was windy, so I wanted to hear the wind blowing through the corn. And it was just beautiful. It was like better than any wind chime you could ever hear. It was just beautiful, and the way the leaves brush against each other. But then I saw some of these. I think Iowa, flat. Maybe a lot of wind going through, not a lot of mountains to disrupt the airflow. And then I saw more of them. And I saw more of them. So when I got to my hotel that night, I started doing a little bit of research. And I learned that Iowa is one of the biggest wind-generated electricity locations in the United States. More than half of the electricity generated in Iowa is from windmills. Pretty darn amazing. They still depend a little too much on coal for my taste. But who would have thunk it, as one of my sons says, that Iowa is a windmill center. And then I haven't looked this up lately, but I was looking up the list of states that sort of rank near this percentage. And another one was Texas. And I'm thinking an oil state is big with wind energy. That's pretty cool. I always file this under things I learned, just that I would never know that I happened to see all those windmills. 57%. So farther into Iowa is a little town right on Route 20 called Dyersville. Dyersville is world famous. It's the tiniest town you'll ever be in, but it's famous. This is Dyersville from Google Maps. It's got a National Farm Museum here. But there's this little site over here. Anybody ever see the movie, read the book? Field of Dreams, Shoeless Joe Jackson? It's still there. This is another close-up view. You might have seen, to the left, they've held some major league games there, or excuse me, over the past couple of years. But that's the actual Iowa cornfield that, Kevin Costner built it, and they will come. And it's open. You can visit it. I had a lot of fun there. There's another place where I chose to spend a good part of the day. This is what it looks like. These are the original light standards from when they filmed the movie. That's a foot selfie, touching one of the bases. I've lost a little bit of my voice. I was at a Super Bowl party yesterday, and I talked to people for like 6 hours nonstop, so my voice started to get a little tired. While I was there, a lot of Little League teams come and visit there. And a father just somehow looked at me and said, "I'll throw you a few pitches, hit a few balls." And so I handed my phone to the guy's wife, and she took this amazing picture of me hitting a ball and get the ball coming right off the bat. One of my favorite pictures from the trip. I can't believe it. By the way, this little hut back here, it's a souvenir stand. They actually sell a wine called Field of Dreams wine. So everybody's into this tourist thing. So as I was getting ready to leave, these are the actual bleachers that they sat on and watched the games, the original from the movie. And so I sat there, I handed my phone to somebody to take a picture. But somehow I don't think the careers of these three, James Earl Jones, Kevin Costner, and Amy Madigan, their careers are threatened by my appearance there. Just a wild guess. So let's see if I can get this to work. So you can actually do your own, go into the cornfield and walk out of it, which I did. By the way, I'm a big baseball guy, still part owner of Red Sox season tickets. So that was me coming out of the cornfield.
Note about the corn in Iowa.
Yeah.
You've heard knee high by the 4th of July. It should be over your head by the 4th of July. And you actually had some good pictures of the corn stalks that they're just way up.
Really?
This is after the.
So by the 4th of July, it should be over?
Oh, yes. I lived in Iowa for 6 years.
Oh, there you go. Whereabouts?
Iowa City.
Okay. I loved it. It was one of my favorite states on the trip. Before I left, this is Craig Purcell. He's the manager who runs the place, and agreed to let me interview him and record him. And again, I kind of asked him about how this whole operation did during COVID. And he was very open. He told me about his divorces and his life. And he's been there for the last 10, 12 years as the manager. So I said, but during COVID, did you guys suffer? He said, no. He said, people still came. And he said, because we're an outdoor thing, kind of like that park in central Nebraska. And he said, but he added one thing. He said, we were one of the few happy places open. And it touched me. And I thought, people still sought happiness by going to a place like this. It was pretty cool. Great guy. I've still corresponded with him. Illinois and Chicago, Route 20 goes right through Chicago. It was the longest day of my life.
Longer than Yellowstone?
Yes. And it was not the most pleasant experience. I found my way through. There were a lot of detours and I followed religiously. But I started in Rockford, Illinois in the morning, through Chicago, up into Indiana. And this part of going through Chicago on the local roads took me 5-6 hours. And, you know, there were some neighborhoods that weren't that great. Other neighborhoods were pretty amazing. It doesn't take you by the skyscrapers, or you don't really see the lake until you get down here. I didn't stop to take a lot of pictures. But all of a sudden I saw a sign right about here. You can see the state border. It says the mayor welcomes you to Gary, Indiana. Does anybody know about Gary, Indiana? It's really down on its luck. There's one statistic that said that 80% of the jobs that used to exist in Gary, Indiana are gone. I think it's 80%, could be a little higher, could be lower. It's
Field of nightmare.
it's I mean, this is Route 20. I mean, this is mile after mile of scenes like this, buildings boarded up that used to be restaurants, gas stations. It really, you know, kind of put me in a bad mood, but I persisted and kept driving. At some of the traffic lights, a couple times I felt a little nervous, but then I said to myself, that's because you're older and you're just a little bit more fearful. It ended up being a pleasant drive. There was hardly any traffic, but it was kind of sad. This is probably the saddest part of the trip. But then Cleveland rocks. Across the border from Indiana into Ohio, spent one night in the western part of Ohio, but then got to Cleveland. Cleveland's one of my favorite cities. But one place I'd never been to was the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Oh,
And has anybody here ever been to the Louvre in Paris?
yeah.
The museum has that great glass pyramid
Yeah.
over, and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is very similar. And the inside architecture, which I'll show you, is just amazing. And it's a neat place to visit. I'm struggling with learning how to play the guitar. I love rock music. I haven't produced anything people would call music yet. This is one of George Harrison's original guitars, which I was just fascinated with. And I couldn't resist a selfie. I was trying to add perspective to show what the inside of that glass pyramid looked like. And it really was beautiful. I forget the architect who designed it, but they kind of used as an inspiration the Louvre, and just loved it. And it was a refreshing break after some of the depression and, you know, decay that I saw in northern Indiana. Cleveland is a city that is still very close to its relationship with the Lake Erie. This was, I had walked out on a pier, and you know, they had the beautiful Cleveland sign and looking downtown. I've been to a ball game in Cleveland before. The Rock Hall of Fame is on the left. But I was impressed with how the city and its leaders have sort of stayed connected to the waterway, to the lake. Really a fascinating city. I just love Cleveland. So I get to New York State. Route 20 takes you south of Buffalo. A lot of terrain that I had covered before in some of my other drives. So I'm nearing the stretch line. This is Canandaigua. I stayed there one night. So has anybody ever been to Seneca Falls? Yeah, Women's National Hall of Fame. Elizabeth Cady Stanton's house, which I visited in the past.
That special bridge,
And what's that?
the special bridge that Diego found his wheels.
This bridge?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is what I focused more on, because I had done the National Women's Hall of Fame 2 years ago when I drove through there. Yeah, that's the bridge that was the inspiration for Capra's in the movie It's a Wonderful Life. It's beautiful, and the city of Seneca Falls holds a festival every year, a Wonderful Life Festival. And Frank Capra, I guess a year before he filmed the movie, he had visited there and he used it as the model for the bridge. Nobody seems to know, did he actually film it there when Clarence the Angel stopped, was Jimmy Stewart, right? Yeah, when he stopped Jimmy Stewart from jumping off the bridge on that cold winter night. But it's clear, and he told interviewers later in his life, this was the inspiration for it. And the city has a whole tourism industry. The sweetest thing that I saw was there's this local custom to remember a loved one. People hang bells on the bridge, and the bridge is littered with these. If you've ever been to Paris and other places, people put locks on bridges, but here people put bells. And I just thought it made it a pretty picture. I walked around quite a bit, seeing stuff that was related to the movie. This woman, and I forget her name, I talked to her for a little while. She runs a woman-owned business that sells crafts, arts and crafts. I was attracted, she laughed, I was attracted to walk into her business because there was a mechanism in front that was blowing bubbles. So she said, you're not the first one to say that. But it is also home, and I still have yet to interview this guy, to a Route 20 museum. This is part of it. Welcome to Seneca Falls, New York. You're on US Route 20, the longest in America, longest highway or road. I'm not sure what that says, but they've got a lot of artifacts and history about Route 20 that is really quite fascinating. And I actually bought a few souvenirs. So home stretch. So to make a statement, I did stop here in Albany, and I decided instead of dropping the rental car off in Boston, I would drop it off at the Albany airport. My wife picked me up, spent the night in Clifton Park, and the next day I got into our little electric car. So I decided the last stretch to Boston, I would take my little Kona EV, 2023 Kona, to Boston. We charged it up overnight. I set off by myself the next morning and decided for at least that last part of the trip, I would burn any gas. So that was my environmental statement on this trip. So Massachusetts, I'm a Massachusetts boy, so a lot of the roadways in Massachusetts are familiar. But as I was trying to find Route 20 with my little electric car, one of the most confusing set of signs to keep you on Route 20, and I'm talking Chicago and elsewhere, was right here in Albany, New York, underneath 787. I got lost twice. I think, there's still some construction going on, but I was very, very frustrated. And I just said, doggone Albany, But so got into Massachusetts on Route 20, and there were still some things to discover. One of them was a flea market. And I'm not talking about something that's this little on a street corner and around Lake New York, where they sometimes have these things in the summer. I'm talking about Brimfield, Mass. Has the world's biggest flea market a couple times a year. If you've never experienced it, it really is pretty neat. This is an aerial view of the flea market at its peak in the summer. And it just, this is Route 20, by the way, which goes through it.
Okay.
It took me, on the day I went through, the flea market was in full swing. Until you had literally thousands of people crossing the street going like this. And you had to look out for them. There were a lot of police. It took me about an hour to cross just a couple of miles, but it's really famous. And I had a chance to see a lot of the stuff they were selling. Original artwork, really expensive, well-preserved antiques, just you name it, you could buy it there. And it draws a lot of famous people, including Martha Stewart. Frequents there and has sold stuff there. But she's a big, I think I don't know if she still lives in Connecticut, but she frequently can be seen prowling the flea market when it's open. So then I continued to Boston, to Route 20. The traffic was horrific. And then finally found my way to Kenmore Square. And there's the other sign. It says Newport, Oregon, 3,365 miles. If you haven't seen that before, it's relatively new.
Oh.
That mayor I showed you in the other end, before he resigned or retired or left office, he worked with officials in Boston to say, the governor's office, can we put a sign in Boston that says Newport, Oregon, that way? And he did. It's great. I had to include the Citgo sign so people would know I was near Fenway Park. So then later when I posted it, I did sort of the before and after.
Yeah.
So that was the start and that was the finish. So just had an amazing time. One last geographic oddity, and I blame my public school system in Chicopee, Massachusetts. They always talked about the Continental Divide when they were talking geography. I didn't know what the heck they were talking about. But I learned that I crossed the Continental Divide in Yellowstone and the Rocky Mountains. And the Continental Divide is this simple geographic designation that if rain falls here, it flows toward the Pacific. When rain falls here, it generally goes east. There are several of them. I saw the Eastern Continental Divide when I drove Route 1, but I learned a lot more that my sixth grade teacher did teach me in Massachusetts, that what a Continental Divide is. So just to wrap it up, again, that's the route. It took me about 14 days. I was exhausted when I finished. I was telling Jim earlier, I have this irrational fear that I'll do something like this and I'll forget details of it. That's why I took 600 pictures. I write a lot of notes. I put a lot of notes in the computer on a Google Drive document. I did something different this time. I'm not going to show you one of them, but every night when I got to the hotel, I did a video interview with myself and recorded it to sort of get, what was I thinking about? What was my frame of mind? What to sort of bring me back to that night in Cody, Wyoming, or Idaho Falls, or Nebraska. So that's how I help myself remember this. So I'll stop for questions, but I'll close with a few comments to thank you for coming. I love to talk about this stuff. The second bullet here, by one prevailing theme of these trips. The best trips are when you don't know what's around the corner. Now, I will tell you, going to Italy in 2009, was a guided tour. I love people taking me from point A to point B. My wife and I are going to go on a river cruise, Budapest on the Danube this fall, every step of the way planned. But these other ventures, I just like not knowing what's around the corner. I like not knowing that I'm going to be immersed in the Field of Dreams, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, getting stopped by a Nebraska trooper. It's just, I can't tell you how energized. I was physically exhausted, but from a mental point of view, I was so energized when I got back that, unlike the Route 1 book, I sort of started to write this book right away. The change of scenery is magnificent and just gets me away from the computer and the TV. Final unpacking comment is this. Large RVs were very present in the western part of the country as I got to Iowa and thereabouts. Going through Yellowstone, Nebraska, they started to peter out. And then it was more, there were still some RVs, but RVs seemed to be a thing people used to drive the great distances of the West. Second were EV chargers. I didn't see one EV charger from Newport, Oregon, till I got to parts of eastern Iowa. And then there was one pedestal in the hotel parking lot. So, I know that electric vehicles have really taken off, but I'm not sure they've built out the network out west. So that's it.
It's on the interstates.
What's that?
They're.
On the interstate?
They're very-
Okay.
they're- You can
Well,
stop
there-
every hour.
There you go.
I had a friend that trip from Miami to LA in 48 hours.
And an EV. That's good.
It's on the interstate.
All on the interstates. Good to know. So that's it. I am done. Any,
Did you pick up any hitchhikers?
no.
I didn't ask any hitchhikers.
I didn't see that many, unlike when I was in college at Amherst, Massachusetts, when hitchhikers were everywhere. And I have a friend I golf with here, he lives in Skodak, and he regales me with stories about hitchhiking across the USA. And it just was a different world in the sixties and seventies. But it was heartwarming to see how open people were with me, though. I mean, I've only given you a small sampling of what I thought were some of the more interesting people I met and recorded interviews with. But everyone was interested in me, my journey. I met this amazing family in a McDonald's in Eastern Oregon that I had lunch with. And it just was fascinating. And I think that getting away from books, the computer, there's so much to be gained by allowing yourself to have an open mind. Iowa, wind generation. I never saw that coming. I never did. So that's that. What questions do you have? You asked me a few and I appreciate that. Any other questions? Shoot.
I've actually been both ends. We were at a conference in Oregon, had brunch at Newport.
You did?
Off of Route 20, and it was very exciting being there. Being that I've lived by Route 20 in Albany almost my entire life.
Oh,
But I was also thinking, for some reason, I've run the Boston Marathon 4 times, and I know Commonwealth Avenue is part of it.
Yep.
So I'm wondering if the Boston Marathon course, I was trying to look online, the Boston Marathon course, and couldn't find the exact route. I mean, I probably could delve more into it,
it
but,
starts in Hopkinton, right? And
right, and it goes to Prudential Center.
to the Prudential
That's where
Center.
it finishes, but
That's a great question.
I
If we-
think we might go to the end of Route 20, but by that point of the race, I'm not looking at signs for what the end of the highway is.
Having been in Newport, one of the fascinating parts of it is it's quite a crossroads. When I showed you that picture of me by the sign in Newport, that's Route 101 is north-south. Route 101 forms the intersection with Route 20, and 101 goes all the way up to Washington State and all the way to LA and California along the coast. So, Nancy.
Yeah, that's perfect. Good to see the book.
I can't eat.
But what road trip are you gonna do next?
Well, that one I'm prepared
Okay.
for, this time. Oh,
Okay.
thank you very
I
much.
didn't want to put the part to what your book.
Oh, thank you.
Three.
I feel like I should send a note. There's two options. One of them is the Trans-Canadian Highway. And, and kind of goes through the Rockies all the way to Vancouver, British Columbia. That's a possibility. And then one of them is east-west, down south. Is to do, and I haven't really examined the road network that closely. But I plan to do one or two more. I think one of the limiting factors is at what point will my wife not worry about me? On the open road. So fortunately, I think that's a little ways away.
Yeah.
But the Canadian thing, now that we're post-COVID, fascinates me, and I can get in and out of Canada with my enhanced driver's license. So that probably is likely.
Great.
So, and I just think it would be beautiful because it starts in such a major metropolitan area. Goes to Vancouver.
Third option for you, there were two Russian journalists in the 1930s.
Yeah.
Who came, they were like the Huntley and Brinkley of print journalism in Russia, and they were wildly popular. They came to the US and spent 3 months driving around the United States. They started in New York City, went to DC, and then went all over the place out to California and came back.
Wow.
Their names were Ulf and Rognick.
Okay.
And I think the title of the book is Ulf and Rognick's Great American Adventure. And and they do a lot of social commentary, which is very interesting for the time. One of their most fascinating descriptions was the description of small American towns. Why does it have 4 corners and there's always a gas station on one of the corners?
So Ulf and Rodnick,
Ulf and Rognick.
I'm gonna have to look that up this afternoon.
So we're leaving on a 4,000-mile road trip on April 29th.
Oh.
And unlike you, I have it planned to the moment. But so here's my question.
I'm not saying that's bad. That's always smart.
Number one, when you rented a car and dropped it off in a different place, didn't they charge you $1 million to drop it
No.
off in a different state?
I use budget rent-a-car. And I rented the car in the shadow of the Space Needle in Seattle. And it was $1,100 to go all the way across the country and drop off in Boston with the drop-off charge. And it got even better. I rented a subcompact because it was just me. And when I got to Seattle, my wife was with me. She was going to fly home and pick up the car at budget. The guy said, "You're going to Boston. You're going to drop it off. This is your charge, $1,200. And he said, "But you can't drive across the country in a little car." And he switched. It gave me the Camry, which was a much roomier car and was much more comfortable. But they did not charge me what I felt was an exorbitant rate, because I go to spring training in Florida a lot